you made this comment that ARC feels a little bit like a counterbalance to the World Economic Forum. So
Yes.
you have the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, which is really trying to say, okay, what is ordinary is actually extraordinary, and we can lose it if we're not
Yeah.
careful, and we're
Yes.
about to lose it. And then you've got the World Economic Forum full of these hyper elites. They want more power
Yes.
over more people. It's just like these are almost like two massive colliding forces. One feels like the Rebel Alliance, and the other feels like the Empire.
Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm joined once again today by my friend Lucas Cole. So Lucas and I had a conversation a few weeks back about Christian nationalism. And this is a very kind of confusing topic. A lot of that is kind of a critique of maybe not moving in that direction. But then you could easily go to the other extreme and say, oh, we're not going to influence society at all. Let's just create our ghettos and, wait this out. And Lucas is not doing that. He and his daughter Savannah went over to London last week for the ARC conference. And I just told him, hey, let's jump on the podcast and debrief this stuff. I've watched probably at least 10 of the presentations from ARC last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever it was. And man, I was just like, it was fascinating. And I'm interested in kind of two layers. One is the content itself, which is really interesting. But then there's actually something brewing. It represents a movement or a shift or a philosophy of how transformation happens culturally or globally even. And as Christians, how do we interact with such a thing? So yeah, Lucas, welcome back. And maybe just talk big picture. What was ARC like? Tell us a
Sure.
little bit about that.
I got the invite from a buddy of mine, Kalev, actually, from Israel. He reached out to me. I had invited him to a Jordan Peterson event here, and he couldn't make it, so I think he was repaying the favor.
Nice.
It is an invite only. Now, that makes it sound a little bit more exclusive than it is. It's just kind of like an invite it forward kind of model.
Okay.
I got the invite. I didn't know really anything about it. I remember hearing Jordan Peterson talking about this thing at some point in time. I think there's only been one event before this event. I'd never been to London before, so I thought this would be a good chance for me to get to London. I also thought it would be an interesting opportunity to expose my daughter to something like this. 3 full days of 8 hours, 10 hours of talks and whatnot. I wonder how she would do with that. I wonder what kind of ideas it would spark, what kind of
Mm.
conversations it would spark. And for no other reason than to at least realize that her dad's not crazy. Like, there's other people that think this stuff too, sweetie, right? Just wait,
Yes.
we're there. And so, yeah, we got there. It was, and again, I don't know anything about London, but it was in East London. If you listen to the Douglas Murray talk, he was pretty critical of East
Yes.
London, and
That was funny.
for good reason. It wasn't a very beautiful part of London. London
Mm.
itself was amazing. Have you ever been to London?
Yes. That's gorgeous. Yeah.
Ah, gorgeous. Did you go to St. Paul's Cathedral?
It was under construction, so I wasn't able to go in it.
The first night there, we had some time and we went there. I didn't even know anything about it. I just found it on a Google map. We went there
Mm.
and they were having a mass. And so we were able to go in
Mm. Oh, yeah.
the actual building. Holy crap, Jeremy. It is,
Yeah.
words cannot express to you the architecture of that building. It is
Wow.
unbelievable. But
Hmm.
so anyway, yeah, we get there, and from the first minute you walked in there, I mean, 4,000 people. It was
Wow.
4,000 people that came to this thing. I mean, it's just, I don't think I was prepared for the kind of the scale of it,
Hmm.
and how large of a turnout it was from all over the world.
Hmm.
And so yeah, and then, essentially you just get submerged into hours and hours and hours of people talking about things at, with a level of, as you've experienced, a level of depth and a level of, the time to really dive into these topics deeply. And the buzz there was just amazing. I mean, everybody was super positive,
Hmm.
super hopeful. I left really truly inspired.
Hmm. So good. Well, I'd love to burrow into the content, and then at the end, we can maybe talk about what this maybe means at a larger level. It's interesting too, the timing. I think JD Vance just the week before was lecturing Europeans on their lack of free speech.
That's right. Yeah.
Did they? Yeah. Oh my gosh, what an interesting, yeah. And so now you have this, this fascinating conference. So there was a number of takeaways that you had. So we'll
Yeah.
start with the, yeah. walk us through what was the first one that really hit you?
Yeah, the first one was, I can speak for myself, though I think other people would relate to this. The kind of the cultural narrative for the past, I don't even know how long it's been now. I don't feel like even in my lifetime, I don't feel like it was always like this, but at least probably the last 8 to 10 years, probably. There's just been this narrative that, like, at the end of the day, if we could just get rid of these crotchety old Judeo-Christian conservative worldviews,
Mm.
the world would be a better place. It would be a more inclusive place. It would be, that people wouldn't feel as, left out. They would be, we would be more of a generous nation. Everything would be better if we could just get rid of these values that have been holding us back. And to the point where you can't even really talk about them. You can't talk about these, let's say, traditional things, these really traditional ideas, without feeling like you're offending somebody or hurting somebody, like really, like, whatever, hurting somebody, oppressing somebody, something like that.
Yeah.
And so you just don't really talk about them that much. I mean, we almost kind of like, we whisper about them in our Bible studies and whatnot, but we just, on the public sphere, we don't really, highlight them much.
Mm.
It's almost like we apologize for them. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. I know I'm a conservative. I'm sorry, And this conference was like the opposite of that.
Hmm.
It was like, what really hit me was almost this idea that we've actually just been lied to. Like, we've been lied to and we've bought into this lie. Because the reality is, these traditional Judeo-Christian values, although they do offend people and they do exclude people, all that kind of stuff, they have contributed, potentially primarily contributed, to the greatest civilizations the world has ever known.
Yeah.
And in all facets of humanity, they've contributed to longer lifespans and better laws and better healthcare systems and everything. And not only should we not be ashamed of them, we should actually be proud of them.
Mm-hmm.
And we should not be scared to talk about them and promote them. And again, I remember just sitting there. I remember, like, when that moment happened, I was like, whoa, I can't believe how ashamed I have been of these things. And I didn't even know it, So that was a huge one.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know if you're familiar with Aaron Wren's whole thesis on positive, neutral, negative world, but basically his thesis is that if you were applying for a job, for example, in the 1960s, and the interviewer said, "Are you a Christian?" and you said, "Oh yeah, I go to church every Sunday," that would be like, "Oh," that would be like a positive thing. Like, that's what it meant to live in the positive world. It was like people are like, "Oh, good, you're a Christian." Wait, you don't go to church? You don't, like, that was kind of a negative thing. Then he said we entered like the neutral world, maybe in the 90s, early 90s. It was like, "Oh, it's just a factoid about you. You're going for a job interview and you say you're a Christian," they'd be like, "Oh, that's interesting." If you say you're not a Christian, "Oh, that doesn't really affect at all my impression of you."
Yeah.
It's just, but it is something. It's a fact to know about you. And then Ren says, I think somewhere around 2012, it's like we entered the negative world. Like, you go for a job interview in 2016 and tell somebody, yeah, I love Jesus. I go to church every Sunday. It's like, you can kiss that job goodbye.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like, how did this like?
Yeah. Well, how did it happen? I don't know if you've heard, like, well, when did that shift happen? Because it happened, and then we almost just kind of like accepted it. Like, yeah,
Right.
that is just how it is.
Yeah, there was a shift that occurred. I think it primarily was around sexual ethics.
Has to be.
Because basically the idea was that
Was it Chick-fil-A that was at the beginning? That was at the start.
I think all these things were very much like they kind of were the canaries in the coal mine, but I don't think they were necessarily causes. I think the idea was that once, I think, first of all, it starts with Christianity just weakening in the culture, right? So you have a weakening influence of Christianity, and then people begin to instead of like, it's such a crazy like transition from like the shame that people felt like in the 60s, 70s, even the 80s around something like sexual promiscuity, to being ashamed that you would ever hold to narrow Christian sexual ethics. Like, that makes you inherently an immoral person. That occurred, in the last, 10 or 15 years. And this stuff started in the academy, 60s, 70s, but it really didn't bleed out in the culture And what I think what happened at ARC that I thought was fascinating. I don't know, like the different speakers, but the one that really got me was Ayan Hirsi Ali made this case. I know at ARC in her presentation, and if anybody listening to this, oh my gosh, like, so Ayan is
Brought the
one of
house
them.
down
Yeah,
there. It
it's
was
so crazy. Her story is amazing because she grew up Muslim, and if you haven't had a chance to read her book Infidel, it's just a harrowing book of what she went through, and when she was living in Kenya and in Saudi Arabia. She's fleeing from her arranged marriage husband, basically, into Denmark. And when she escapes from Islam, she becomes really a militant atheist. And so then she spends, the next, I don't know how many years, decades, eventually comes to the United States and is a major promoter of new atheism. And she goes through a very severe depression and decides to over the course of a conversation with a therapist who said, look, you're spiritually bankrupt, comes to faith in Christ and has just a massive conversion to Christianity. And so at ARC, what she really says to, the audience there, and I think she's been saying this all over the place, that like we need to understand that our civilization depends on Christian morality. Like we,
Yes.
we live in this what she calls a cut flower society, where basically you can cut the flower and it does look pretty on day 1, day 2, day 3, but that root is no longer there. And by day 20, that flower is not going to look pretty anymore.
Right.
And we're still in, we're right now at that stage where the flower is starting to like wilt, and people are realizing, oh, it's not coming back unless we reattach to the root.
Yeah.
So that's I thought her case for that was brilliant.
Well, and that's when you're in a conference like this and you're hearing, really you could say that everybody was just talking about ideals, right? And that's the other thing that I think has been lost in these last 10 years is we don't really talk about the ideal anymore. Or I shouldn't say it like that. Maybe we don't talk about the collective ideal. We don't talk about what's best for everyone for all time. We've moved the conversation to what is best for the individual now.
Right.
And I think what happens is,
And the fringe. I mean, it's gone
Yes.
past that. It's like, let's promote the fringe. Like, so yeah, you go from promoting the ideal to saying, well, we're just promoting the individual, everybody to each his own. That's really the neutral world, to
Right.
promoting the fringe. If you got a aberrant opinion, that's what should be in the
that's the
center.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you lose touch with that ideal, and you start to think that, like, again, the ideal almost feels like it's bad because it's naturally exclusive to a lot of people. But when you actually just start looking at, okay, let's just take any one of these. You can take marriage, right? The traditional idea that a man gets married to a woman and stays with her forever, right, for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, that feels old and dodgy and archaic, and we've moved on. It's like, look at the data around single parent homes. Look at the data around children born in these homes, and look at the data. I mean, look at the data. Like, I'm not talking about opinions at this point. Like,
Right.
the data is in.
Right.
It wreaks havoc on people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does it work sometimes? Yes, it works sometimes. Is it admirable when you see a single parent working their butt off to try to make it? Yeah, it's admirable. Is it ideal for society? No, it's not ideal for society. And we need to stop promoting it. As a matter of fact, I was in a London gift shop when this song by Pitbull and Dolly Parton came on. And it was all about like single mothers and talking about how they're the champions and they're the queens and they're the real powerful ones and all this kind of stuff. And it just hit me. I was like, no, they're not. Like, my heart goes out to them, and I think all that's true. But like, we have to stop promoting that as the ideal for society, because it's the data is in, it doesn't work.
A child with a step parent in the house is 100 times more likely to be killed than a child with 2 biological parents in the house. 100 times. Like, that's how severe it is. And we've been desperately trying to hide these statistics because we are, understandably empathetic to single parents. Like, what a terrible, difficult situation.
Totally.
But in order to be empathetic towards them, we're hiding this information to the next generation, thus making it more likely that when marriage gets tough, they're like, well, kids are resilient, no big deal, I'll just move on. And wow, what a disaster that's been.
Need a blueprint to revise your family to be a multi-generational team on mission? The book, Family Revision by Jeremy Pryor, is the book that summarizes all the big picture ideas you hear on this podcast. Available on Amazon or familyteams.com.
Okay, so
Okay, yeah,
I wanted you to tease out a little bit of what you heard at ARC around family, because
Yes.
so that was another observation that I'm curious. Yeah, what did you see?
Yeah, this one, and again, it's even interesting to me that it hit me as hard as it hit me, because it's like when I read this, I'm like, yeah, that's how I think about family too. But it's another example of we just never talk about this stuff anymore. We never
Yeah.
actually promote it anymore. So at one point, there was like a panel, and they were talking about kind of what ARC is, right? They were talking about like, why does this thing exist? And essentially a think tank. You can think of it that way. You bring all these thinkers together, and you really just try to come up with some sort of coherent vision that people can get behind and say, yeah, and then how does that vision relate to your government in the United States and your government in the UK? And how does it relate to different policies that might be at place and whatnot? But really having like one centralized place where they come up with these positions on things that then can be promoted outwards. And he was just talking about how hard that is to do. He was like, because in any one of these categories, there's, thousands of different ways. And so they sit there for hours and hours and hours and, anguish over how to define these things. And he talked about they were coming up with a policy on family. Because again, if you're going to advocate for certain policies that relate to family, well, then what is a family? And what kind of family are we talking about advocating for and whatnot?
Yeah.
So Peterson says at the end of this, and you could tell he was even like, there was like some trepidation in him, like as he was about to like throw this out there. He said, the ARC policy on family is to promote stable, committed, monogamous, heterosexual, childbearing families. Woo!
Yeah.
Don't feel like fighting words now. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like, that was just, it took me off, it took my breath away to hear it and just be like, oh yeah, that's right. That at one point was the ideal.
Right.
We've lost that ideal. And now it's really encouraging to hear some, and I think it's important. Let me just say this. This is the trick with ideals is, look, whenever we're talking about the ideal, every one of us is going to fall short to some degree,
Yes.
right? It doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it.
Right.
It doesn't mean we shouldn't promote it. It doesn't mean we shouldn't teach it.
Yes.
We should constantly be measuring ourselves against the ideal and knowing where we're not up. I think what ends up happening is for somebody to hear, whatever the ideal is, this definition of family. And then it's like, oh, now you find one person who doesn't, and it's like,
exception.
you can't talk about that. You can't talk about that because no. We're all flawed. We're all faulty. But you know what? If I'm going to put a definition for what the ideal of family is out there, let's use this one.
Right.
Right.
That's
And
right.
it was really refreshing to hear it.
Yeah. Without ideals, there is no wisdom. Without ideals, there is no compass. Without ideals, we don't know what we're shooting at. And so I think a lot of people would rather everyone wander in the dark than anyone feel judged. And that is a mess
right.
for the next generation. We have to be promoting ideals and be doing it in a graceful way and be doing it in a way that says, look, yeah, we all fall short, but that doesn't negate the fact that is the ideal. And so, yeah, this fight over what is ideal. And obviously the statement in that definition that's going to raise the most eyebrows is childbearing. Like to even suggest that a marriage ideally is a childbearing institution is to court a lot of pushback from people who have bought into the belief that individual freedom is the highest value in all the world. If you believe that, then to suggest that there's something normative about a childbearing marriage and that is a natural and ideal and should be as a normative valued fruit of marriage, that is an unusual and increasingly a religious position. And one of the things that's bizarre, I just did a podcast with Catherine Picolic, who wrote this book called Hannah's Children. And one of the things that she discovered, and she's a very well trained PhD economist and really trying to understand the what causes a family to have a lot of children. That was her question, 5 or more children. And she said, look, the data is crystal clear. It is religious faith. You do not find people with 5 or more kids that do not have religious faith. It's incredibly rare. And so if you want large families, and if you value that, if you think that that's a natural fruit, there doesn't appear to be a secular case for that. The secular case for the freedom that is created, the impulsive freedom created by having smaller families, or other values that are created by secularism, always tend to win. And this is why you find anywhere where there are secular cultures that are growing, you have fertility rate just plummeting below replacement rate. And the only exceptions to that are these sort of religious communities within
Yes.
different groups. So that's one that just really is fascinating to me, that I know that there's a lot of people that are agnostic and not believers in any religion that were part of ARC. And the fact that they got childbearing in there is really really surprising to me.
Well, it was definitely, it's interesting, the religious kind of undertone
Hmm.
of the conference. If you didn't know any better, you would have assumed it was a Christian conference.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? You just would have, right?
Yeah.
It smelled like a duck, walked like a duck, quacked like a duck, right? But they actually, I think they did a good job of I think what can sometimes happen when you brand something Christian is you stop the argument at because God.
Right.
Instead
You have to
of,
make a data-driven argument.
there you go. Instead
Yeah.
of saying, no, it's actually better for society, it's actually
Yeah.
better for human flourishing, it's better for all of these things. And I think that that's what they did. They never stopped at, well, because it says the Bible's, the Bible says that. It was always, oh, guess what? We actually did some research and we actually found out, right, that this is
Yeah.
actually better, right? Like population collapse, for example. The idea that human freedom to wait until you're having children is the ultimate, freedom that we want to express and promote. Well, the dark underbelly of that reality is a society that population goes into free fall,
That's right.
and bad, 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 bad news for everybody.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah. People don't understand the apocalyptic implications.
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, of this kind of population collapse, that in, what is it, 100 years, there'll be 4% of South Korea will be left at this
4%.
current rate.
I
Yeah,
know
it takes
my kids watch World Watch News every morning, and I overheard them talking about, they did a bit on Japan's population
Japan's
collapse.
is dropping even faster than South Korea. Yeah, it's not quite below South Korea yet, but I think it will be. Yeah, and we were just in Japan, and I've never seen so many robots or old
Really?
people working. It was so interesting. Man, it's rough. Like and Japan's been one of those places that has been the most difficult to penetrate with the gospel.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I think that, well, the other word that really caught me in their definition was just to call it the word monogamous.
Yes.
And I think this is something that's interesting, because it used to be that monogamy was a critical part of what it meant to be on the right, be conservative. And right now we have mostly like functional polygamists in power.
So real fast, when we talk about monogamy, we're not
Yeah.
talking about the difference between monogamy and polygamy, meaning you have multiple wives at the same time, but that you would commit to one romantic partner for the rest of your life. Is that what you mean by monogamous? Or is that how
Yeah.
you're thinking about it?
Well, I think that their point, it sounds to me, is that monogamy is a norm. Like you want to be promoting the idea that there is one, that instead of the kind of a winner take all. Okay, you've got, and this is what's happening on the dating apps. This is what's so crazy, is that you've got basically a reality that the top 20% of the guys on a dating app can mate with the top,
Right.
basically almost the entire group of women, and the bottom 80%. And so there's something very broken about creating a polygamous culture. It may not be formally polygamous, but we are flirting with a polygamous culture. And Andrew Tate was just on the PBD podcast yesterday, really promoting polygamy. He was saying that it's the way of kings. He was saying that, like, that he wants, I'm going to outbreed all of you guys, and I've got basically his baby mamas all over the world, reproducing his children. And he's promoting this to, and the thing that's really dangerous about Andrew Tate isn't necessarily that he's a dangerous person. The danger in Andrew Tate is that he is a brilliant articulator of pre-Christian ideas in a culture that only has a vague intuition of Christian theology. So these young men that listen to Andrew Tate have no defenses left against this. Is going back to our first point, what Ion was describing about being in a cut flower culture. The problem is that when you cut off the root structure and you got a guy like Andrew Tate describing the glories of polygamy to young men that could possibly pull off what he's doing as an ideal, then the only thing that can really stand against that is a deep understanding of Christian morality. And like there is this beautiful partnership that through Christian morality we understand creates a husband and a wife, and that lifelong covenant is the only moral God ordained way to build a family. And he's going to promote, and this is, so this is evaporating. And so I think to actually explicitly call out the importance of monogamy for the first time in probably centuries, this is critical. We have to talk about this overtly. Otherwise, I do believe we're going to give rise, and we are giving rise to a polygamous culture. We're giving rise to a culture, and by that I just mean sort of functional polygamy. When a man decides that when he's like 35 years old, he's going to get divorced, and he's going to, and now he's, let's say, especially financially successful. When you decide to marry a woman after you've already achieved a great degree of financial success, that is a different kind of marriage. Yes. She is oftentimes subservient to you in a way, especially if a prenuptial agreement. You're not really a team. You're not really partners. You're not equal partners building a family. At that point, what you really are, she's joining your hyper masculine clan, and you have enormous power. And for you to sort of decide to cheat on the side of that second, third, fourth marriage, oftentimes is just par for the course. And again, that is functional polygamy. Yeah. And what Andrew Tate said that was just kind of just made people's heads spin was that he was asked, what about your daughters? What if your daughter decided to marry a polygamist? Like, what would you do if your daughter married a man and after 10 years, he decides to have a mistress, multiple mistresses on the side? And basically, Andrew Tate said, I would tell her, honey, this is the way the world works. Like, does he take care of you? Does he protect you? Does he provide for you? Then let him have fun, I mean, that's a polygamous culture. That's not just...
and it's interesting, going back to our point before, like, if you don't have some other root structure that you can pull from, like, and you're some guy and you hear that, you're like, oh, wow, that sounds way better, right?
Totally.
Than this other
yes
thing that I've been told, like that. And I think that's what you're going back to, the danger of losing these Judeo-Christian values is,
yes,
just because these new values sound attractive, that doesn't mean that they're time tested.
That's right.
And show the stability of whole societies the way that Christian values do. And we really are flirting with our demise.
That's right.
When we entertain these ideas.
Yeah. You don't realize that if you create a culture in which, a Genghis Khan culture where the top like 10% of men have 5, 7, 10, 12 women, what you basically create is a society in which the bottom 20, 30, 40, 50% of men never get married, never reproduce. And that creates an inherently unstable situation within the entire culture. Now you saw that in cultures, and what they would do is they would just form those guys into gangs and they'd send them off to war, right? And they would just commit violence. And if they weren't doing that, they'd be rampaging through the villages. And so you would always have to start new wars to basically cull the herd of these bottom 50% of men, so the top 50% can enjoy all the spoils of all the women. I mean, it's just a horrible culture. Christianity came into those cultures and completely revolutionized them.
Right.
This was very difficult for Christianity to do in the German culture. In the German culture, they were very resistant to this because they had a very Andrew Tate kind of celebration of this kind of masculinity. But eventually, like Christianity is the only force we know that can essentially take a culture like that and do what, and this is why Nietzsche, the philosopher, who said, oh, Christianity creates this slave culture, because he was very much wanting to create this Ubermensch, this overman, this power man, Superman kind of culture that is being promoted now. And I think that what's fascinating is that pre-Christian vision of the polygamous, non-stable, kind of family, it's going to collide head on with the secular culture, and whatever exists within sort of this, LGBTQ kind of like that whole world is going to get crushed between these two giant forces of pre-Christian ideas of family and Christian ideas of family, because those are the only ones that are going to reproduce.
That's right.
This strange secular ideas. Unfortunately, what the secular ideas do is they open the door for these pre-Christian ideas to come flooding in the same way that these secular cultures open the door to unfettered immigration from other countries that create often an unstable element within the culture, because there isn't any kind of ability to judge. There's no discernment. There's no wisdom, because we don't have an ideal. Going back to what you said earlier, without ideals, there is no wisdom.
That's
And
right.
so you can't discern when what you're doing is going to be self-destructive. You just kind of have these very vague general values, and you try to live according to them, and you watch your society just completely self-destruct because you don't see that you
Right.
violated the ideal at some fundamental level.
Right. You're living in a perpetual experiment of your own
That's right.
that, that at one point was held, and we found out it sucks and it's really bad. But like, you don't have that data, and you're just trying these things because they feels good,
That's right.
Um, well, but the good news is at least the ARC Forum has thrown out the definition of family and
Yeah.
has put it out there for us to kind of wrestle with and whatnot. So at least there's some organization that seems to kind of fight.
I appreciate, yeah, like just make it explicit. Like let's talk about what
Yes.
this is. And that the fact that they were seeing the root structure back within our faith.
Like what you hear? Be sure to leave a rating and review for this podcast wherever you use streaming.
And then there was a third about I'm curious, yeah, what were they promoting in terms of the economy? You were describing that.
I think it was just interesting. Again, instead you can kind of take economic stuff at face value on both sides of the equation. You can say like, making more money or having more stuff is just inherently good, or it's inherently bad, and you can just leave it at that. And what they were kind of elucidating there was, along every kind of known metric of human flourishing, there is a connection between human flourishing and economic prosperity, just point
Hmm.
blank. Now, there's these studies that have been done that show like happiness as a result of as it relates to household income. You've probably seen this before. Like happiness is like super low, and then as your income goes up, it like peaks. And I
Yes.
think at one point it was like $75,000 a year, and then after
Right.
that, and so yeah, I think the same is true with global economics. Like there's at some point where having more and more and more probably doesn't equate to that much more human flourishing, but for the vast majority of people on this earth who are still not at that, whatever that level is, economic prosperity solves way more problems
Yeah.
than I think we are ready to admit. And so they were looking at a lot of different factors through the lens of its impact on the economy.
Hmm.
Family being one of them. Family being, a huge one. Matter of fact, I've got, this little report here that they put out,
Hmm.
it's just called Family Matters: Why Our Choices Determine Our Economic Prosperity. And it was just showing like how connected even the presence of these stable family units is to an economy, and how detrimental uh, it is to an economy when that family structure starts to break down. And so it was just interesting to hear the conversation around family being posed as, not necessarily the reason why we should promote family is so that the economy does better,
Yeah.
but also kind of pointing out that in addition to all the things we talked about why family is better, oh, by the way, it also leads to the most economic prosperity out there. Um, the other part of that conversation was around the energy conversation, which was really interesting. How much they devoted a lot of time to
Yeah.
energy there, which I don't think I was prepared for, and quite frankly, I wasn't super interested in. But one idea that stood out to me was that all of the conversations we're having about green energy and trying to get to net zero and whatnot we're the only ones that can actually have that conversation because we've actually solved the energy problem, right?
Mhm.
But if we were to hold the whole world to that standard, we would keep the majority of the Earth's population in abject poverty for hundreds of years, right? because the number one thing that's holding most of the world back in terms of achieving economic prosperity is access to affordable energy, not clean energy, affordable energy. And the energy sources that they're using currently are not only incredibly difficult for them to get, they're also terrible for the environment, right? And terrible for their health and terrible for everything. So they kind of shifted the focus away from let's have clean energy and climate as the ultimate goal for all of our energy policies to let's have affordable energy to lift as many people out of abject poverty as possible be the goal. And then as soon as we're able, let's start to shift our focus to clean energy. And so that was just, again, this is me, a noob to the whole topic. I never thought about it that way before, but again, it made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. There has to be a way for families to get out of poverty. And if create conditions that don't allow for that, if you essentially, get your family out of poverty and then you pull up the ladder behind you
That's
so
right.
that it ends with you and you leave everyone else in that state. And that's really what happens when you consume cheap energy. And then when you have affluence, you're like, okay, go ahead and jack up the energy prices. I can survive now. Our family's going to thrive
Right.
anyway. We got our business going. You
And
jack up
don't let
energy
anybody else
prices.
use those same means because it's bad for the
That's
environment.
right, because at that point, those families are stuck down there because energy is in. This is where economists have really discovered that energy costs are a little bit of like the panacea for the economy because the energy prices are baked into everything. And so if you want to lower prices, you have to decrease the price of energy. And what's happening in Europe is that for the sake of the environment and oftentimes just for the sake of their own sort of virtue signaling, because there's all these
That's right.
decisions to like shut down nuclear power plants that actually do clean energy way better than the coal power plants. But they will shut them down, jack up the price of energy, and it's just devastating on the environment. It's devastating on the people in their society that are still in poverty and are trying to work their way out. And so this idea and this kind of net zero obsession that Europe has been disastrous.
Yes.
And this is why you see, Trump and others get so excited about drilling and, figuring out any way that we can create some cheaper, affordable pathways to energy. I think for Lucas, for us, like I think our interest in general is just like we want to make sure that those who are discipling that are younger than us and our children who are coming behind us,
That's right.
they're able to get to a place of economic self-sufficiency. Like it's critical. Families cannot be endlessly dependent on others if they're going to be free. If we're going to have a free society, you've got to help people get to a place where they can provide for themselves and their families. Otherwise, whatever they are dependent on, they're going to have to bow to that thing,
Yes.
that ideology, whatever that is, in order. It's really a matter of survival for them at that point. And so this is what's at stake often in this energy conversation.
Yeah. And it's, I've found that in this topic and in other topics, whenever the argument is introduced that if you want to go this way, it leads to killing people. Like it like shuts down all kind of critical thinking around the topic. It's just kind of like, oh, well, I don't want to kill anybody, so I guess we need to do clean energy, right? And one of the things I appreciate about the conference is they're like, okay, we're not ignoring the impact that coal and natural gas and things like that has on the environment. It has an impact, okay? We have to weigh that impact against the other impacts that not doing it has and all that kind of stuff. And then we have to make a really informed decision about, you and I have talked about this before. There's no perfect solutions out there.
That's right.
There is no solution out there. The more you grow in wisdom, the more you realize there is no right answer. There's always trade-offs. There's always compromise. There's always tension that you have to manage. And I felt like they did a really good job of that and really just helping us understand, like, look, yes, we have to keep our eye on the climate data. That's important. But there's this whole other piece of data nobody's talking about. Which is if we don't fix this thing, it's actually way worse for more people than if we only focus on this thing. And again, I appreciate that approach. It feels like it actually requires some critical thinking versus just emoting a response to these things.
Yeah, so good. Yeah, Constantine, when he was at the Oxford Union, he made that speech about basically describing how it's impossible for no matter what England to do. There's too small of a footprint for them to have any real appreciable difference on the environment.
Right.
And yet they're passing these laws that are having massive impact on people's lives. Man, it's really like, it reminds me of Rob Henderson. He's got this sort of like a thesis around what he calls luxury beliefs. And I find this
Yes.
idea so helpful, which is that, there are beliefs that you can only start to entertain once you get to a certain level. They're almost like status symbols. And,
Yes.
part of even what we're talking about in terms of like, it's a sort of a status symbol to say that I don't really need marriage. Like, I'm wealthy, my kids are gonna be taken care of. I'm in the 0.01%. And so I can tell young men who are in the bottom 99.9% that they can, that I can sort of destroy their confidence in marriage, not realizing that this is, or maybe not caring that this is just a luxury belief.
Okay.
That what you're going to do in convincing these young men is that you're going to create all these single parent households that are going to be disastrous for those children. And so, yeah, this is like one of the most pernicious luxury beliefs that I can demonstrate my virtue and my
Yeah.
status through my opinions about the environment in a way that doesn't really affect the environment, but has a devastating impact on my neighbor.
Versus the simple idea that, if if you really want to like positively impact the world, like get married,
Yes,
have some children, teach
right.
them the truth, like in some interesting way. I think that was kind of the message behind everything at ARC too, was like, yeah, there are these luxury beliefs that only the elite can have, but there's actually these other ones that are available to all of us.
That's right.
And,
Yes.
you really want to do something. Like, what if all of us decided to just pick up, I was going to get to this later, but Jordan Peterson, his last speech, it was kind of interesting.
Mm.
He how he's kind of a creative dude. So he was trying to do this thing where he would talk for a little bit, and then he had like a live symphony orchestra.
Hmm.
And they would play a little bit, and then he would talk a little bit, and then they'd play a little bit. You could tell he was kind of like experimenting with presentation, styles and whatnot. It was okay. It was a little bit difficult to get on board with, but
Yeah.
once I kind of got it, I was like, okay, I see what he's doing. This is kind of cool. Well, anyway, as he's kind of encouraging the audience towards this vision that they're putting forward and whatnot, the last line, the symphony's playing, and he like stops dead center in the stage, and he says, "Welcome aboard the Ark. Now pick up an oar and row." And I tell you, it's weird, but I've been thinking about
Wow.
that. It's stuck in my head. Like,
Yes.
there's something about just doing the basic stuff.
Yeah.
The basic stuff. Get married, have kids, work hard, tell the truth,
Yeah.
believe, right?
Yeah.
Submit yourself to a higher power, focus on the ideal,
Yes.
We don't have to have crazy big idea. We don't have to be Elon Musk, right?
Right.
We can all do quite a bit with just the
Yeah.
basic stuff.
I think really one of the things that's just underrated that occurred was that in the Industrial Revolution, we started to become hyper specialized. And so everybody jumped into a specialization, and therefore what was normal, what was kind of ordinary, but yet still incredibly epic, getting married, having children, became sort of passé. And so people in these elite institutions that are specializing, who have never experienced what it's like to be a father or a mother or raise a successful family or deal with these things on the ground, are, nevertheless, the ones who are, writing the books, setting the policies,
Right.
educating the next generation in abstract ideas that they invented out of their own heads, as elites who don't really understand these really basic things that create wisdom, that
Yeah.
don't have actual contact with reality. And you made this comment that ARC feels a little bit like a counterbalance to the World Economic Forum.
Yes.
So you have the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, which is really trying to say, okay, what is ordinary is actually extraordinary, and we need to really, we can lose it if we're not
Yeah.
careful, and we're
Yes.
about to lose it. And then you've got the World Economic Forum full of these hyper elites who have only ever specialized. Nobody's really paying attention to the basic fruit of their ideas and what happens when their ideas contact reality. No, they want more power.
Yes.
over more people. It's just like these are almost like two massive colliding forces. One feels like the Rebel Alliance, and the other feels like the Empire.
It really truly felt
Mm.
that way. I mean, and it didn't hit me until near the end of the conference that, I don't even know if it was maybe explicit to them that they were starting ARC to counteract what was happening. But it actually inspired a lot of hope in me because, again, you hear about the World Economic Forum and you hear about these, these elitists and these, Illuminati, whatever it is behind the scenes. And
Right.
it was kind of nice to be, there's somebody's at least
The counter conspiracy.
That's right. Somebody's at least trying, and second
Yes.
year open, 4,000 people were there, and whatnot. And we touched on it before the podcast started, Jeremy. But I think the other thing, kind of connecting back to our Christian nationalism conversation, I came across in that podcast as kind of saying, hey, I think the church needs to stop being so involved in the state, let's say, and be more focused on the church. But it was interesting to see this model. Because it's very involved in the state in some degree, but it's involved through influence. It's involved through casting vision. It's involved through being a city on a hill and trying to essentially encourage people to live in a certain way that is undeniable to the rest of the world, to say this way is better, right? And to try to influence policy from the outside as a block of people versus trying to take over the government and run the government. There was something that was really like, I think that's what the church should be. I think the church should be this massive influence organization that has a better way and is willing to share all of its wisdom with the world without needing to be the one controlling everything.
Yeah.
And so that was encouraging as well.
That's good. I love it. There's a vast alliance between Christians and these reality respecters, people who give reality a vote instead of some crazy utopian abstract vision. And so, yeah, I think we need to make common cause, and we need to also really understand that at the roots of all of this is what Jesus came and what he brought and what he taught. Like, he's the true revolutionary. And man, if there's anything that I am concerned that we have downgraded because of familiarity breeds contempt, it's Jesus himself. Jesus, he taught some of the most absolutely amazing ideas, and we need to trust them. We need to like root in them. We need to promote them. We need to teach them to others and teach them to our children, and be proud in the best sense of them, like in a sense that we don't think that other ideas are on par. They're just not. They don't work at the same level. And this does demonstrate that he is the Messiah. Like, he is the one who's he didn't just save the world. It isn't just he's going to save us. So
Right.
I'm very encouraged by what you learned there, and love getting to have this conversation with you, Lucas.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson's come out and given Jesus his credit lately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The new gospel series.
Well, he's there was two things I saw. One was I can't remember the interview guy. He's a really good interviewer. I don't know his name. I think his name's Alex something. But the question he posed to Jordan Peterson was, everybody asks you if you believe in God, and you get around that question pretty quickly and all that kind of stuff. He's like, but let me ask you this. Okay, if somebody went back 2,000 years ago and set up you saw
Alex O'Connor,
set up a camcorder, does the camcorder show Jesus coming out of the tomb or not? And Jordan said, it does. I think he says it does, right?
Yeah, I
I
believe
was like, whoa, that was the first time I actually heard him say that. And then there was another podcast where they asked him, do you believe Jesus is God? And he said, I believe he is.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, there it is.
I think it's interesting. It is like this sort of like Ayaan Hirsi Ali's story. The more I think he's understood how well Jesus' ideas actually save the world, and what the world looks like when we move away from his ideas. It's such a powerful apologetic for the truth.
Undeniable.
And I think eventually it just starts to overwhelm your mind, and just like
especially with a guy like him, you could see him like stewing over something for like years, and then like reading one line of Jesus and be like, damn it,
Yeah, there he is
It
again.
always comes back to Jesus. He already figured
Yes.
this out,
100%.
But, so
Awesome. Well, thanks
cool,
so much
man.
for being on here.
You got it.
Right.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.